Mr. Chair, we are now live.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Uh, I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we're in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu Cree, and Dakota peoples, and the natural homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation and Treaty 3 territory. My name is Neil Harden. I'm chairing today's panel. With me are Kent Seelan and Mike Colatriglio. The assessor today is Nathan Kupfer, and the administrative personnel is Tristan Bredden. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment rule in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we'll limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by council and is independent of it and the city administration. And it makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order to be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decision with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We'll then have the applicant's testimony followed by questions, the assessor's testimony followed by questions the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You'll receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We'll be hearing items 1 through 6 on on our docket today. Mr. Braden, can you please affirm the assessor's and applicant's testimony?
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Nathan Kupfer.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Mark Newman.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Okay. So the first item on the agenda today is file number 24-3346. No address on McDermott Avenue. So Mr. Kupfer, you can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you said, the first file number we'll be dealing with is 24-3346. The roll number is 130-960-43100, and the street address is simply McDermott Avenue. The owner of this property is 211-6669 Manitoba Corporation. This is a surface parking lot comprising of 3,454 square feet, has approximately 13 stalls, and it's located downtown. This property is located at the intersection of McDermott and Ship Street, so it's just before waterfront. We have a 2025 assessed value that's been model driven here of $345,000 that I'm going to recommend be confirmed today. Pages 2 and 3 of my brief provide photos of the subject property, so you can get an idea of the orientation and the location here. As I stated, on the corner of McDermott and Ship, and you can see how close it is to Waterfront Drive. Page 4 of my brief provides a bit more information on the property. As you can see, we have no recent sales of the subject property to base our valuation on here. We are using land to determine our value here. So the breakdown is shown for you on page 4. As I stated, this is 3,454 square feet. The rate being applied is just under $100 a foot, which equates to our value of $345,000. Below that is our classification and liability allocation. No issues here. The entire property is classed 60T. Page 5 of my brief provides a list of land comparable sales. I've kept it fairly short here. We have six comparables for you to view. They range from just under $95 a foot to a high of just over $150 a foot. All of them are located downtown, some in very close proximity to the subject, some of them a bit further away. Page 6 of my brief are just excerpts from the Municipal Assessment Act. No issues here with this one. Starting on page 7 is the income and expense mailer, which was submitted by the property owner. As you can see on page 8, the owner confirms that there's 13 stalls on site. It's the same amount that we have on file. And they list a negative net operating income for the 2022 year of just under $3,000. Moving to page 12 and onward of my brief, these are photos and maps of my land comparables. So I've tried to provide some photos and a map just to give you an orientation of where these are located. You'll see a lot of these same comparables throughout my presentations today, so I'll just go over them quickly here. Comparable number 1 at 126 King Street. This is a smaller lot, similar to the subject property. This one's located just a bit behind City Hall. Comparable number 2 is located on Donald Street. This one is south of Portage, so it's just between St. Mary's and York Avenue. Again, it's a smaller lot, similar size to the subject property. Comparable number 3 here, this one's at 240 St. Mary Avenue. This one's just located just beside the old Mitzi's there, where you used to go and get your chicken fingers. Comparable number 4, 633 McDermott Avenue. This one's closer to Sherbrooke and closer to the HSC there at the hospital. So probably the furthest from the subject property out of my list. And then comparables number 5 and number 6 are both located on Bannatyne. They're both larger lots, but they are located quite close to the subject property. So that's what I was able to come up with for this property. Again, it's been modeled at just under $100 a foot. That equates to $345,000. And that's the value that I'm going to recommend be confirmed today. And I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Newman.
Yes, and let me just say to the panel at the outset that, and I think the assessor is aware of this, I think all the issues you're going to face on all these properties today are essentially the same issue. So I'm going to ask a series of questions on this one in a little more depth, and I won't repeat them on all the subsequent ones in the interest of efficiency. Mr. Kupfer, good morning. So all the properties that I have today, they're all presently used as surface parking lots, correct?
Correct.
And is it fair to say that they've been used as surface parking lots for decades?
I believe for at least some time, yes.
Okay. And just because it's been a while since you and I have had a hearing together, can you remind me, how long have you been with the department?
Since 2016.
And are you by any chance taking your AACI courses, trying to get your designation?
Not that designation, no.
Okay. Of course, we're here today to address the question of value defined in the legislation: willing buyer, willing seller, open market at the applicable reference date. I think we're all agreed on that. These properties are used as income generating properties, correct?
Correct.
And I take it as part of the education process you've received to learn the business of valuation and the business of assessment. You're aware that there's different methodologies to value property: income, direct comparison, cost.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. And you're also aware, I assume, of the concept of highest and best use. Is that fair?
Yes, I am.
And highest and best use requires that an appraiser make an assessment of whether a proposed use is legally permissible, physically possible, financially feasible, and maximally productive. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
And is it also fair that the contemplated use must also be reasonably probable?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So, I presume then that when you come to do the assessment of the properties we're going to deal with this morning, you consider a highest and best use analysis. Is that correct?
No, I haven't done a highest and best use analysis on all of the properties that we'll be discussing today.
All right. And just because of the way you answered it, just so I'm clear, when you said I haven't done it on all of the properties, is it correct that you haven't done it on any of the properties?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So, as I understand what's happened, and I'm asking you to confirm that I'm correct, is the department essentially looks at these surface parking lots from two perspectives. It looks at it from an income perspective, it looks at it from a land value perspective, and whatever perspective spits out the highest value, that becomes the assessment. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And in the course of doing the assessment on this property and all the other ones we will deal with, did the system spit out an income value for the property in addition to the land value?
Yes, it did.
And then you look at those two values, and because the land value is higher, you go with that value.
Our system does, yes.
Your system does, fair enough. And you accept, obviously, what the system is doing.
Yes, I do.
Okay. And are you aware that historically, the subject property we're dealing with right now, but as well, all the other properties that I have on the docket this morning, historically, they've always been done on an income approach?
I haven't reviewed the historical record there, but I'll take your word on that.
All right. And if we look at your brief, just look at page 2 for a moment. That's where you've got the overhead photos of the subject property. We can see it's 3,343 square feet. It says on page 2, although the cover page says 3,454, but leave that aside. You'd agree with me that the configuration of this subject property is irregular in its configuration.
Yeah, that's a fair term. It could be worse. It could be better.
Okay. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Seelan, any questions?
No question, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Colatriglio.
Just so that I'm clear, this is a normal approach to use if the income generated number does not go over the land value, you default naturally back to land value, is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I guess would a person looking to buy the parking lot pay the land value for that parking lot?
I believe that that's plausible. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, even though it doesn't work out, the mathematics don't work out as it would be for if you bought it for its income.
Correct. Two different methodologies.
Okay, but isn't using it as land value making the assumption it's going to be sold for development purposes?
Well, putting it at land value, in our opinion, is matching the highest and best approach to valuing this property. So if a willing buyer and a willing seller were to meet, it's the highest and best use of the property that would be determined to be the one that it would be sold for. That's our position.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Newman, you can begin your presentation.
Thank you. And I think what I'll do actually is begin right where the last questions and answers ended, because I think that's really the essence of the problem you need to deal with. And you heard the assessor in cross-examination confirm to me that no highest and best use analysis was done on any of these properties. Particularly in the context of this property with its irregular configuration and small size, it's presumptuous, I would suggest, to think that anybody is going to buy this property for land value, which of course brings with it the implication that it is ready and capable of being developed. And in order to address value, and I'm into my brief now, so we have the definition of value at the bottom of page 2. That's the obligation of the assessor. That's the obligation of this board. That's what we are in search of. What would a willing buyer pay to the willing seller? The burden of proof, page 3 of my brief, is on the assessor, section 53(1) of the Municipal Assessment Act. In order to meet that burden of proof, in order to value the property, I think you have to do a highest and best use analysis. The assessor readily concedes, and I appreciate that because it makes our hearing much more efficient, but the assessor readily concedes what we all know is a fundamental component of appraisal methodology: determine what the highest and best use is, which means going through the tests and checking off those boxes. These subject properties, all the ones we're going to deal with today, have been used as surface parking lots for decades, truly for decades. And perhaps regrettably, but as we drive around downtown Winnipeg, we see a lot of surface parking lots. If you drive around downtown Toronto, if you drive around downtown New York, you won't see surface parking lots. And the answer as to why is simple. There's not enough demand in Winnipeg for land for other development purposes. It's not economic. Excuse me, it doesn't work. And that's why these lots remain as surface parking lots. I spoke with the other day with the former longtime manager of Impark, who told me that Impark has never bought a surface parking lot in the city of Winnipeg. They manage them, of course, but they've never bought one. Why? Because the vendors want to get paid for development purposes. And Impark says, we can't make a buck if we have to pay you for development purposes, that value. So they don't buy. They manage, but they don't buy. So if we go now to page 3 of my brief, you see the highest and best use section. The International Association of Assessing Officers, and this is the standard published July of 2017, which I think is the most recent one. They say that when you do mass appraisal, you have to stratify the properties and you have to determine their highest and best use. And while it's true that zoning and other land use controls certainly contribute and may dictate the highest and best use, there's more to it than that. And as the quote says, the 4 components: legally permissible, that's zoning, does the zoning allow it? Physically possible, will the topography, will the lot site configuration allow it? Is it appropriately supported? Is it financially feasible? It's got to work economically. If it doesn't work economically, then it's not the highest and best use. And so I recite those tests in the bullet on page 4. And as the assessor has confirmed, and I have it in bold, the assessor also has to show that the proposed alternate use is reasonably probable. It's not the hypothetical. Here's what the zoning says is permissible. It's what meets all the criteria of the test including, is it reasonably probable? And I say to you that there's no evidence that an alternate use other than a parking lot, while it may be physically possible and while it may be legally permissible, there's no evidence that it's financially feasible. There's no evidence that it's maximally productive. There's no evidence that it's reasonably probable for two reasons. One, as the assessor has readily conceded, he's not done that analysis. But secondly, there simply is no evidence based on the use for decades and decades. So I then move on to comment on, and I think I've really said much of this already, the demand for land. The demand isn't there for the land. That's why we have so many parking lots. Parking demand itself. If we didn't have cars, of course, we wouldn't need parking lots. But if demand for parking is reduced, then we need fewer parking lots or fewer stalls. And now we get into what's happened in downtown Winnipeg over the last number of years. Because, and you will see from the income statements that are being presented to you, generally speaking, parking lot operators have suffered significant deterioration, reduction in their revenues. And there's a number of reasons for that. One of it, of course, is COVID. But it's not the mere fact of COVID itself. It's what followed on COVID. And what followed, and I'm sitting here today with two live members of a panel. That's unusual in my experience. And that's not a criticism, it's just an observation. A lot of panel members don't come to hearings. A lot of assessors don't come to hearings. A lot of agents don't come to hearings. Sometimes I come because I like to, and it's the secretary and I sitting in the room, which is fine. But my point is, there's parking demand in this room because there's panel members sitting here. You take everybody away, that parking demand is gone. And now you magnify it across the entirety of downtown Winnipeg. Because what generates demand for parking in downtown Winnipeg? Generally speaking, the answer is the offices. Sure, there's casual demand. If there's a concert at the arena, you'll get a flood of people downtown. If there's a hockey game, you'll get a flood of people downtown, but that's casual. Parking lots can't survive on casual. They need steady. So parking demand has diminished significantly. It's diminished because people work remotely. It's diminished because offices in downtown Winnipeg are downsizing. The Winnipeg Biz published a report a couple of years back on the state of the downtown and the impact of the pandemic. And it noted, and I'm at page 6 of my brief now, what has happened to the demand for parking. It noted the Winnipeg Parking Authority, a 50% decrease in street paid parking demand. Transit ridership was down. Storefront businesses reported a drop in revenue. Why? Because the people aren't coming downtown the way they used to. And when the people don't come, the demand for parking is reduced. Simple as that. Remote work feeds into that as well. People want to work from home. A lot of people like it. I don't. I like to come in actually. But there's a lot of, my office is a ghost town sometimes. The people don't come in. They prefer to work from home. And it's interesting, it's become an interesting flashpoint in collective bargaining because the unions went along with take us remote when COVID hit. Now that COVID's gone, union members have decided we kind of like working from home and they are resisting the return to downtown. And I get it. And I get it in bigger places like Toronto where you've got to travel an hour and 90 minutes each way on public transit. I for sure get it. I get it if you're a single mom and you got to bundle your kids out of the house and get them to daycare, to get on a bus to get downtown. I get it completely. I understand, but it's the reality we have and it's become a big issue. So that all of that is by way of background. I won't repeat it in the later hearings. You've heard me on this already. Let's now turn to the income performance of this property, page 7. You can see that the revenue of this parking lot actually stood up. You can see what it was historically in 18, 19, 20. It stood up in 21, and then it crashed in 22. How come? The answer is because there's an adjacent office building. Mr. Harden, Mr. Seelan, we heard this one yesterday, 93 Lombard. There's an adjacent office building that supplies a lot of the demand for this parking lot. They lost a major tenant, and it has impacted this parking lot. So you see the revenues, they crash in 2022. You see the expenses, you see the negative income in 2022. But you see that, give or take, it's averaged around $15,000 over the years. So what I ended up doing, and I will tell you, I've done this with all the properties. I use the word conservative. I'll also use the word generous. I haven't tried to grind the net operating incomes down. I've been, I think, pretty reasonable, pretty generous with the net operating incomes. I've used $15,000. Even though 2022 was negative. So that's the net operating income I'm using. Let's turn to capitalization rate. And I'm only going to present this to you once. I'm not going to repeat it. So we all know what capitalization rates are. They address the risk, the expectations for return. We all know that interest rates have increased. Here's a section on the jump in interest rates. Interest rates went up by 4.25%. We know what's happened to downtown Winnipeg in terms of vacancy. We know, if you look at page 13, the office capitalization rates that the city utilizes, we know that they've gone up compared to 2021. So in 2021, an A office building, the 20th and 80th percentiles was 6%. Never mind that people often disagree with those. For my purposes, just accept that. In 2023, it's jumped up by 50 basis points to 6.5%. The B buildings were at 6.75 in 21. In 23, they jumped up to 7%. Why have they jumped up? For all the reasons I explained to you earlier. Offices are a crappy place in the real estate market in downtown Winnipeg to be. Their occupancy is reduced, their vacancy is up, people are trying to downsize, and there's an oversupply of space, all arising from True North Square coming into the market back in 2018, and it then had a domino effect on all the other buildings. Layer on top of that problem, COVID, and it's become a bit of a disaster for the office market. And that in turn impacts parking because the office market is the demand generator for parking. So now I turn to a discussion of the cap rate specifically. 2018, the cap rate was 5%. 2020, the assessor used 4.5%. That was pushed back against with a lot of success. 2023, again, the assessor came with a 4.5% cap. My experience was it turned into a 5% cap at the hearings. My position to you is simply capitalization rates have to go up because the parking lot business has become riskier because the stability of the income stream has become much riskier. And when the stability of the income stream becomes riskier, capitalization rates have to go up. And that's what I say at the top of page 14. COVID, incomes with parking lots are down significantly. Office workers, to some extent, have deserted downtown Winnipeg. Board of Revision members, assessors, agents, a lot of people don't come. Interest rates went up. Now, Altus published an analysis, and Mr. Navarro is here, and he's going to present to you after me. Page 23 of my brief is his analysis. And what they did is they reviewed sales of what they considered to be parking lots. And you can see that the capitalization rates are in the range generally of plus 5%, and in a number of cases over 6%. And what that leads me to ultimately say to you is you should, for all the reasons I've articulated, pick a capitalization rate of 5.5%. You should use my net operating income of $15,000. That creates value of $272,727. That's my submission. I'm open to questions.
Okay, questions, Mr. Kupfer.
Just a few. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking back on your page 3, Mr. Newman, regarding the excerpt that you've pulled from the IAAO here.
Yeah.
Would you agree with me that this statement includes zoning, that it is zoning and other land use controls which normally dictate the highest and best use of vacant land?
I agree with you that zoning and land use controls dictate in the sense of negative option. If the zoning permits it, then it's a possibility. If the zoning prohibits it, then it's out. It's not possible. But even if you get through the zoning hurdle and you get through the physically possible hurdle, you still have to clear, as that quote says at the end, legally permissible, physically possible, appropriately supported, and financially feasible, thereby resulting in the highest value. You have to meet all 4 tests.
So the zoning of the subject property that we're discussing currently, and I think most of the properties we'll be dealing with today, is D for downtown. That's correct. Yes?
Yes.
Are you aware of anything within the D downtown zoning which would preclude development of the site?
There's nothing in the zoning that would preclude development for certain uses. You have to get into configuration and what's physically possible. But if you're asking me if hypothetically the zoning would permit alternate uses, yes, I agree.
Okay. And just beneath this, and I won't belabor this too much, but it does state that it is in the absence of such restrictions that the assessor must determine the highest and best use of the land by analyzing the 4 components, correct?
That's what it says.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just a few questions then about your page 7, the NOIs that you've shown. These are all related to the subject property, correct?
Correct.
Do you have any comparable rates? Did you look at any properties, other properties to support this?
So these lots are all managed by Impark. And I'm satisfied that they attempt to maximize the revenues from all of these lots. And therefore, in my opinion, and because there's 5 years, I think we've got a good cross-section of the related, the revenues that the property can generate.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Colatriglio, questions?
Yeah. Ultimately, Mr. Newman, the question that you are asking the board to answer today is, should you use the income approach exclusively? Or is there a principle of it can't be worth less than the actual land value? Correct?
I don't think that's correct. I don't, because the land value, if it's not reasonably probable, and if it's not financially feasible, an alternate land value use in the form of development is never going to happen. And so you can't get to, I should use a land value methodology without getting through the highest and best use analysis first. That's the first step.
But ultimately, if someone, obviously this site that we're looking at specifically is a very small site.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a site that you would be able to build on legitimately. You might be able to put a small building on it, but that wouldn't be the highest and best use even for that. But I noticed in the pictures that were provided, or the map of the area, it is made up of a bunch of parking lots all in that general area. And a land assemblage for a project to be built on that would be ultimately its highest and best use, I would imagine.
Again, if the analysis is done that says it's legally permissible, let's assume it is, because the zoning will permit, that it's physically possible, let's assume it is, because the topography will allow. If it's financially feasible, Now you need to do the analytics. How big, what am I gonna build? Am I gonna build commercial? Am I gonna build residential? Am I gonna build mixed use?
Mhm.
What's my construction cost? What's it gonna cost me? What can I get back from tenants? Can I support a project buying land at what price? Because that's what you have to back into ultimately. What price can I pay for the land? And you know, of course, that a lot of projects in downtown Winnipeg, interesting article in the newspaper today, tax increment financing is making them go. They don't go without it because it doesn't work economically. So, but yes, you go through all those steps and you say, and it's reasonably probable that can happen. In that case, you can value on land approach. The evidence before you, let's be clear on that. The evidence before you is that there is no such evidence. Essentially, what the assessor is saying is it's legally permissible by the zoning. Therefore, you should assume something else will happen. And I say to you, look at the demand, look at the number of surface lots in downtown Winnipeg, look how many decades they've been surface lots. That tells you a lot about demand.
And I certainly wouldn't quibble with you with respect to the number of parking lots, how long they've been there. And I understand that in other major cities, we would not be seeing these kind of open spaces, as it were, available for potential developments on the line. But if we were to go along with your reasoning, and if COVID and the problems that were related to this, had they generated a value, whereas as you pointed out, I believe on page 7 of your brief, I'm just gonna. Yes, the revenues and incomes, you can see very steadily through 2018 all the way to 2021. We're in around $30,000, $31,000, $32,000. A very steady stream of income. And then in 2022, it went down to 14,600.
Yep.
Now, what if had that number gone to 0 or even less? Would you suggest at that point that we should still use the income approach and live or die with that number, sir?
No, well, what I would say is if it goes to 0 in 1 year, that's why you look at a number of
Stabilized.
years.
So true, and I understand that, but ultimately, the owners of these parking lots are hoping that downtown Winnipeg rebounds and that people come back, like us panel members, like yourself today. And that's ultimately what everybody wants, of course. But it's hard to accept that if the value were to drop in the income, and I appreciate the fact that you're saying, well, I've used a stabilized number. And you have, and I'm giving you credit for that. But I'm just wondering if that number was lower, would you be still here saying we should go with a lower number yet?
The answer is I might be, but I want to put this in perspective.
Yeah.
The proposed assessment is $345,000. I'm not here looking for $1 or $10 or 10,000 or 100,000. I'm at $272,000. That's not a significant difference.
No,
Relatively speaking.
it's not, but the principle, I guess, is the point I guess I look at it. Because at the end of the day, land is land. You can't break land down. It doesn't depreciate. It doesn't do anything other than exist.
It may not depreciate in the traditional sense, but its value does fluctuate.
That I will agree with you.
Right. And so all I'm going to say to you is you're raising an interesting hypothetical, I'll suggest with respect.
Yes.
But we've got a set of facts that we're dealing with. And we've got a set of revenues and we've got what I consider to be a very reasonably stabilized net operating income. We've got capitalization rates that for a variety of reasons, I believe are supported by transactions in the market and by things happening in the economy and what's happened to parking lots more generally. And for all of those reasons, I think I'm in the right place.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Seelan.
Yes, do we know why in 2022, net operating income was negative?
We do. So for many, many years, the engineering firm, the multidisciplinary firm, which has had a number of names over the years, DS Lee, LEA, ND Lee, LEA, WSP, they occupied over 15,000 square feet in that building for decades. And they left. They went to the suburbs. And they had a lot of staff. And they created a demand for parking, which this lot, to a significant extent, satisfied. Gone. That's it. Simple as that. The demand diminished because an office tenant vacated from a nearby building. But again, I'm not looking to ignore that. Or I'm telling you why it happened, but I'm not saying reduce the NOI because of it. I've stabilized it at a very reasonable number.
Thank you. That's any questions, Mr. Chair?
All right. I guess it's more for curiosity than anything. Do you know why the expenses in 2020 went up so much?
So, I've attached all the questionnaires to my report. So the 2020 report questionnaire indicates, and you know, I noticed something interesting, and I actually commented on it during our hearing yesterday, and I didn't pull them out separately, but I did on the other properties. The tax is on this property in 2020 were $8,500. There was some maintenance and repair that was done of $8,242, and there was a snow clearing of $8,900. And you know, sometimes we have heavy snow years, and you're going to end up with much higher snow clearing expenses. But I think, Mr. Harden, it's just the coincidence and confluence. And this is page 20 of my brief, the 2020 questionnaire. It's just the confluence of those events and those expenses in that year that drive it down.
Okay. All right. And I guess you're arguing that the demand for parking is going down, hence the cap rate should be rising. But the demand for development of properties is also going down. Would that be fair to say?
Well, demand for development is always sporadic and irregular. You do see projects happening from time to time. More and more, they tend to be conversion projects, I'll call them. And we've seen office buildings in downtown Winnipeg, including 433 Main, converted to a multi-use building. It was office only for decades. And now they've converted upper floors to multifamily, and that's happening in other buildings. I mean, there are pockets of development happening, primarily multifamily, but a lot of it has been conversion and rehabilitation on existing footprints and structures, as opposed to brand new development filling empty space. You know, when I stabilize the net operating income at $15,000, which again, I think is quite generous, there's a risk about the stability of that income. And that's one of the reasons why the capitalization rate, in my opinion, has to come up.
Okay. This property, though, if someone were to be using it for development purposes, wouldn't sell on its own, would it? Would it be fair to say that you'd have to buy adjacent properties?
And I think that's correct. And indeed, Mr. Colatrugio referred to assemblage, and I actually meant to comment on that. But it's true, this parcel alone is not big enough to support what I'll call economic and productive development. It would need an assemblage, and of course, and this hasn't happened, so it's a hypothetical discussion, but whenever you have an assemblage, you have to be careful about the land values because there's a motivation inherent in the assemblage. Somebody's putting it together because they think they're going to build a bigger and better mousetrap. And so that's why you need to be careful. But I agree with you. On its own, this lot isn't going to support development.
All right. Thank you very much. Do you wish any submission, Mr. Kupfer?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Newman.
I'm good as well. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for this.
And again, the rest will be much prompter from my perspective because I won't repeat what I've done.
Yeah. All right. I presume that let's move on to the next property, which is also on McDermott. The file number is 24-3342. Again, no address on McDermott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That file number pertains to roll number 13096103300. As you stated, this is again no address, McDermott Avenue. It's actually right across the street from the previous property we discussed. The owner is 4310951 Canada Limited. This is again a surface parking lot, just over 7,500 square feet in size. And we have a 2025 modeled assessment, again using land value of $826,000. Pages 2 and 3 of my brief show you photos of the subject property. So again, right at the corner, essentially, of McDermott and Ship Street and Waterfront Drive. Again, it's not a, it's a bit of an unusual shape as it's kind of on the bend here, coming around Waterfront. Page 4 of my brief, again, shows no recent sales for the subject property, so we're not getting any help there. Below that, it shows the workup for the valuation. So again, 7,505 square feet at a rate of just over $110 a foot, gives us our value of $826,000. And below that, just shows the classification. Again, this one is all 60T, no issues with classification. Page 5 of my brief has the same land comparable table that I provided for the previous property. Again, 6 comparables, all of them in various locations throughout downtown. Comparables 5 and 6 on Bannatyne would be the closest in terms of proximity to the subject property. Page 6 of my brief contains Municipal Assessment Act excerpts. Beginning on page 7, I've included the income and expense mailer for the subject property as submitted by the property owner. Similar to the last property, this one is showing effectively no net operating income at all for the time period being reported on. And they list 26 outdoor surface parking stalls. Beyond that, beginning on page 13, I've included all the same photos and maps for my comparables for you to use as reference when reviewing. And beyond that, I have nothing else on this property. So again, 2025 land assessment of $826,000, which I believe should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Newman?
No questions.
Okay, Mr. Seelan.
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Colatriglio.
So land value once more,
Yes, sir.
thank you.
Okay, I've got a question. The previous property was basically $100 per square foot. Now this one is twice the size, but it's more per square foot. Why would that be?
Well, in my opinion, a lot that is a little bit bigger would be easier to develop. The smaller lots, as we spoke about in the last property, generally require some sort of assemblage in order to become economically viable. A lot which is larger potentially wouldn't require that, so it may be appropriate to select a higher rate per square foot.
Okay, but this this one, the previous one had a possibility for assemblage as another large lot right next to it. Whereas this one is basically standalone. There's no possibility of land assemblage with it. So wouldn't that dictate probably a lower price?
Well, that's certainly not a factor our model would take into consideration. But again, in my opinion, there's a bit of a sweet spot here with land size. If you're too small, you're generally not going to command the premium rate per foot. And again, you may see that sometimes with larger properties as well, where there's a bit of an economies of scale factor happening. And then again, you don't see that premium dollar per foot. So this is what our model put out at right around 110 per foot.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Newman, you can proceed.
Thank you. And again, I'll abbreviate the presentation to some extent. Page 2 of my brief. So again, some basic background facts. Surface parking lot, 26 stalls. It's been a parking lot for decades. It is located immediately behind the building known as 93 Lombard, which again was on the docket yesterday. To a significant extent, it services the occupants of that building because it's the most proximate. People, when they park, they look for two things first. How much does it cost? And how far do I have to walk outside? Those are the two things they look at first, and they balance those. Definition of value again, burden of proof again, highest and best use again. Not going to repeat all of that. I'm on to page 4 now. The demand for land concept, the parking demand concept, the page 5, the downtown Winnipeg biz report. Things have become difficult in downtown. Lower half of page 6, the remote work concept. People wanting to work remotely, unions resisting the requirement that employees return to the workplace. I then come at the bottom of page 7 to the income performance of the property. And again, I've got the income and expense statements for all of these years attached as submitted to the city. And you can see again that generally speaking, the revenue's been relatively stable within a somewhat narrow range. 48, 50, it jumps up a little bit in 20 and 21 to 59 and 56. Then it slips back in 22 to 49. 22, of course, is the year when that big tenant in the adjacent 93 Lombard building leaves. So the slippage a little bit in revenue is understandable. The expenses, I'll come back to that in a moment, but you can see them as well. And you can see what the NOIs look like over the 5 years. 22, again, a heavy snowfall year. And I also noted, as I said to you earlier, how much the taxes are on these parking lots. You can see that they're roughly $16,000 a year. And to me, it's very interesting that what I call the interest of the municipality in the property value, how big it is, how significant it is. That's not a criticism of anything. It's just an interesting observation how dependent the city is. And of course, this is a constant refrain from them. We need other sources of funding, but how dependent they are on property tax. And how much is being paid by these parking lots, because in many ways, the city, I'll use the phrase, is almost making as much. And of course, they're not making because they're providing services, but they're almost receiving as much out of the parking lot as the owners are. So that's just by way of observation. I'll come back to the financial statements in a moment. So at the end of the day, I use a stabilized net operating income of $25,000. Again, quite reasonably and quite generously, I think, considering what's happened. And what I'm telling you is I'm not trying to grind this down to nothing. or close to nothing. I'm being very reasonable, I think, in my net operating incomes. The cap rate has to go up for all the reasons I've articulated previously, but again, when I'm using a high net operating income, that creates risk, and so the cap rate's got to go up for that reason as well and alone. Discussion of cap rates again, it's really a repeat of everything you heard before. It's all about the risk associated with the income capacity of the investment. It's about what's available in other investments. It's about increasing interest rates. It's about the history of parking lot cap rates, 5% in 18, 4.5% in 20, but pushed back, and the board is granting 5%. In 23, again, the board is granting 5% in my experience, but things are different in today at the reference date of April 1, 23 compared to the reference date of April 21. And the reason they're different is because at April 1 of 21, we're speculating a little bit. COVID is hit in 20 in March of 20. So what's typically looked at is 18, 19, and 20. That's what would be looked at. And so there's only what I'm going to call one down year in that cycle of 3 years. But now when we get to April 1 of 23, now we've got 3 years of the COVID and post-COVID experience. And so we've got a better grounding, I'll suggest to you, better evidence of why the capitalization rate should come up. I again reference the Altus analysis, which is attached at the back of my report. Again, Mr. Navarro is going to speak to that significantly. And so at the end of the day, what I'm saying is $25,000 of net operating income at 5.5% becomes $454,000 of value. That's at page 14. Now, let me just circle back because Mr. Harden, I'm going to anticipate a question you might ask, which is looking at page 7 and the expenses. What happened in 2022 that the expenses are up? And so I go and I ask this question actually of the property manager. So I go and look at the 2022 questionnaire. And again, you can see the expenses are really made up of 4 significant components. $16,800 on account of taxes. So that's a third of the expenses. This is page 17 of my brief.
Thank you.
So at page 17 of my brief, you can see total expenses $48,000. A third of that is the property taxes. About 16% of that is repair and maintenance, and 21,000 of that is waste and snow removal, a significant amount. And again, there are sometimes just cycles of snow, and some lots have place to pile snow, and you'll have a lesser expense. Other lots don't. This lot does not have where to pile snow, and so that's what it is. But again, I think my stabilization is more than taking into account the ups and downs of both the revenue and the expenses. That's my submission.
Okay, questions, Mr. Kupfer?
I don't believe there are any new issues here, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions.
Okay, Mr. Seelan.
No, my questions have been answered. Thank you.
Mr. Colatriglio.
I'm good, thank you very much.
And I have no questions. This time I did look ahead at the expense statements and did notice the increase in the snow removal.
So just to clarify, yeah, 455,000 is what you're looking for? sir?
Yes.
Thank you. That was my only question.
Okay, thank you. Let's does anybody need a break right now?
For sure. Please.
Okay, we will then have a 10-minute break till 10:15, I guess, at this point, and then we'll come back and finish the last 2 properties for Mr. Newman.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we are now live.
Okay, thank you. Welcome back. We'll resume with 129 McDermott. So, Mr. Cupfor, you can begin on that property.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's file number 24-3351. The roll number is 130-960-4500, and the street address is 129 McDermott Avenue. The owner of this property is 431-1051 Canada Limited. This is another surface parking lot located in the downtown area. This one is quite a bit larger than the other ones we've discussed at 38,916 square feet. And we have a 2025 modeled assessment of $3,037,000, again using land value, which I'm going to recommend be confirmed today.
Mr. Assessor, if I may, sorry, just 1 second. There seems to be an audio issue with your microphone.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of static. I was about to comment on that.
Yes.
Okay, I haven't changed anything from when I was presenting this morning.
Garbling noise that is coming through.
Yeah.
Are you picking it up on your side, sir?
I'm not picking up anything on my side, and I haven't changed anything from when I was presenting prior to our break.
Could you possibly just try, I'm gonna mute you and then we're just gonna unmute and see if that fixes it.
Okay. Does that sound any better?
No, it's still staticky.
I think you're stuck with it for the moment.
Yeah, let's proceed. We'll hopefully get it solved, but let's keep on going.
Okay. As I stated, this is a larger lot. My pages 2 and 3 show photos of the subject property. Again, quite close to the last two that we discussed, just north of them. This is between Rory and Waterfront. Page 5 of my brief confirms that we have no recent sales for the subject property. And below that, it shows the breakdown for the valuation. So this one we have at $78.04 a foot, over 38,916 feet, gives us that value of $3,037,000. Page 6 of my brief shows our land sale comparables. These are a bit different from the ones we've shown previously, in that we've tried to use a sample size of larger properties. So you can see that our smallest ones here on the list are in the 18,000 square foot range, and then the larger ones are a bit over 35,000. And the mean and median are shown for you there. The range is about $83 to $136. Page 7 of my brief, again, is just Municipal Act excerpts. Beginning on page 9 of my brief, we have the income and expense information for the subject property. This property reported a net negative net operating income of a little over $10,000 for this reporting period. And then beginning on my page 15 are photos and maps of the comparables, which I provided for you on page 6. So with that, I have no more information on the property. And again, I'd like to ask that the assessment be confirmed at $3,037,000. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Newman? Okay, Mr. Newman, do you have any questions? Oh, the boardroom is muted for some reason.
Yeah, Bernie.
Okay, now you're
Here we
unmuted.
go.
Can hear you now. Yes. I think it's just the IT people wanting us to know who's really in charge.
They are in charge, okay?
Mr. Assessor, could I get you to try your audio one more time before we reconvene?
Testing. Any better, please? No.
No.
Testing.
I'm gonna
Try it, please.
in the waiting room and then get you to rejoin, or could you try rejoining the Zoom?
Okay, let's just continue on, and we'll deal with the audio problems. Just continue on, please. Mr. Newman, your questions.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. All right, Mr. Colatriglio, questions.
Again, this is land value that Chris got.
Yes, sir, it is.
Thank you.
Mr. Thielen.
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I have one question, and probably should have asked it for all the properties today. Do you know if this property is being actively marketed other than as a parking lot?
So
No,
I can answer that. I can tell you all the properties I am dealing with are not being actively marketed.
Okay. Thank you. So your presentation then, Mr. Newman.
So again, and I'll be brief, similar to what you've heard from me already. We go to page 2, 116 stalls, $3,037,000, the definition of value, the burden of proof on the assessor, same highest and best use information that you've heard from me already. Page 4, the 4 components of highest and best use, and the need to show that the proposed alternate use is reasonably probable. The concept of demand for land. Again, this lot has been a parking lot for decades and decades. The downtown Winnipeg Biz report in terms of the impacts on the population downtown and therefore the demand. The spread of remote work and what that's turned into. And so now we come to page 7, and here's the income information. And so again, we see the 5 years, and it's interesting, this property has fallen off very, very dramatically in stages. If you look at 18 and 19, round numbers, 260,000, 280,000, then down to 188, then down to 133, then down to 71. And again, it's all about the demand diminishing and the need for the parking simply not being there. The expenses, reasonably consistent, little bit lower in 2020. The net operating income, you can see, it's really tailed off very badly, and it's quite negative in 2022. At the bottom of page 7, again, because it just struck me how significant the interest of the municipality is. Taxes are almost $75,000 in 2022. It's not a surprise that they're losing money, and they've been at that level generally for a long time. So again, this lot is particularly sensitive to the surrounding demand from the office buildings, and it's just fallen away. So, but notwithstanding that, and again, as I've said to you throughout, I've been, I think, reasonably conservative and very generous. You can see I'm using a stabilized income of $138,000. And you might say to yourself, what kind of number is that? And I'll tell the board with candor that when we did the 2023 appeal, and 2020 was the last relevant year for purposes of that appeal cycle, what I did in that year is I took the 2020 income of $126,000. I added 10%. That became $138,605. And I've just continued that. Over the top generous, I think bluntly, in the context of how this lot is performing. But in return for that, because it's appropriate, but also because I'm using a very high net operating income, I'm looking for a value. Now I'm at page 14, using a 5.5% capitalization rate of $2,520,000. That is my submission. I am open to questions.
Questions, Mr. Kupfer?
How is my sound now?
Well, you're kind of echoey, but it's not staticky.
Is this better or worse? This is speaking into my webcam directly.
Much better.
It's
It's
better.
better.
Not you don't have the static. Yeah.
Okay, great. I have no questions regarding this property. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Colatrigio, questions?
I have no questions either at this point, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Seelan.
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Of the three properties that we've dealt with so far today, would it be fair to say this one has the most potential for redevelopment?
I would agree with that in the sense that because of its size, that gives it potential. But that's as far as I would go. There's a lot of other steps to be jumped through and considered. And but yes, in a simple answer to your question.
Yeah. Okay. And okay. Thank you for that. We'll move on to the next property then on Main Street, 229 Main.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is file number 24-3345. The roll number is 1209-1954000. As you stated, the street address for this property is 229 Main Street. This is again a surface parking lot of 11,180 square feet. It has the M multi-use zoning, and we have a 2025 again modeled assessment using land value of $1,230,000. Pages 2 and 3 of my brief provide some photos and maps of the subject property. So you can see now that we are south of Portage. This is across from St. Mary Ave if you're coming out St. Mary onto Main Street. Page 4 of my brief. Again, we have no recent sales for the subject property, unfortunately, to use for reference. You can see the breakdown provided by the model here. Again, using a rate right around $110 per foot for this property over a land size of 11,180 square feet, gives us our value of $1,230,000 for 2025. Page 5 of my brief shows comparables. Again, land comparables for the subject property. Again, we've tried to kind of approximate the size. We've excluded some of the very large ones and some of the small ones. But by and large part, these are many of the same comparables that you've been seeing all morning here. Page 6 of my brief, again, municipal assessment excerpts, and then the income and expense beginning on page 7. For this property, again, the property owner has reported effectively no income for the 2022 period, a net operating income of just $2,460. And beyond that, beginning on my page 13, as always, I've provided you with photos and maps of the available comparable land sales. Beyond that, I don't have anything else on the subject property here. Again, 2025 assessed value, $1,230,000, using land of about $110 a foot. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Newman.
No questions.
Okay, Mr. Colatriglio,
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Seelan.
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, question I have, this is relatively near the High Line. Is it beyond the 100-foot requirement setback?
I have no information on that, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, I can't answer that.
Okay, because that would very much restrict development near the High Line, with the requirement for, I believe it's a 30-meter setback from rail lines. All right, thank you. So Mr. Newman, your presentation.
So let me start where you finished, Mr. Harden. You are exactly correct. This is within, certainly some of it is going to be within the 30-meter setback requirement. And so the ability to develop may become an issue potentially. But again, this has been a parking lot for decades. So I'm not going to repeat what I've said to you both in depth on the first one and in a lesser degree on the subsequent ones. I'm going to take you direct to page 8. And there's the layout of the revenues and expenses. And again, this one held up reasonably well. And the expenses were reasonably consistent. You know, a bit of a spike in 2022. You know, 2 reasons: some repairs were done, and also significant snow. This lot does not have access off Main Street. So to get to this lot, you actually have to go into the back lane behind that runs parallel to the High Line and parallel to Main. And so you can see what the revenues have been. In 2020, they were $40,490. Never been at that level since. I'm stabilizing at $40,000. Again, quite generous, I say to you, from that perspective. And if you jump ahead to page 15, if I capitalize that at 5.5%, that becomes $727,000. And that's the value I'm asking you to fix. That's my submission. Thank you.
Any questions, Mr. Kupfer?
No questions from me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Seelan.
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Colatriglio.
I'm just curious, is this owner of this property the same as the one immediately behind? Where you have to go through to get to this property? Are they the one and the same or not?
Well, the property is accessible off the back lane,
Right,
public lane.
right. Is this ownership and the one that's on the other side of that public lane, are they the same or not?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, that one is just curiosity more than anything.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Mr. Newman, for your presentations, and we're giving you more time today than we did yesterday.
Nice seeing all of you. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
and you won't see me next week, Mr. Newman, since both my hearings have been canceled.
Yes.
Okay, now can you swear in the next applicant, Mr. Navarro?
Mr. Navarro, please stand. Please state your full name.
Marcelo Navarro.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Yeah, you may be seated.
Okay, so we'll go to, yes, item 5 on the agenda of same spot, 225 Main.
Just give me a second. Oh, let's do. Oh.
Okay, are you ready, Mr. Navarro?
I am.
Okay, so Mr. Kupfer, you can begin then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is file number 24-2023. The roll number is 120-978-00000. The street address is 225 Main Street, and the owner is 100-60193 Manitoba Limited. This is a commercial surface parking lot with a land area of 12,565 square feet and the M multi-use zoning. We have a 2025 assessed value of $1,382,000 today using land value. Beginning on page 2, I've included photos and maps of the subject property. So this is adjacent to the previous property we discussed, right on Main Street. As you exit St. Mary onto Main Street, you'd be facing it. This one does appear to have direct access off Main Street, unlike the previous property. Page 4 of my brief lists the sales for the subject properties. We've got a listed sale in 2014 of $690,000. And I have another sale in 2024, which I am not allowed to show you as it is past the reference date. Underneath that, we have the breakdown for the subject property. Again, 12,565 square feet at a net rate right around $110 per foot, derives that modeled assessed value of $1,382,000. Below that is simply the classification and liability allocation. So again, like the other properties we've discussed today, this is all commercial class 60 property, no issues with classification. Beginning on page 5 of my brief, I've included some comparable land sales of some similar size properties in the downtown area. Again, none of them are an exact match, but provide a reasonable sample size when looking at land sales. So we have a low of $83 and a high of $132. Beginning on page 7 of my brief is the income and expense information as submitted by the property owner. So for the 2022, just into the beginning of 2023 cycle here, it's being reported net operating income of $27,000, about $27,500 for 2022. And then beginning on my page 9, I've included photographs and maps of my comparable land sales for your reference. Beyond that, I don't have anything else to say on the subject property. So again, I'll just recommend that 2025 assessed value be confirmed at $1,382,000. Thank you very much.
All right. Questions, Mr. Navarro?
Yes, Mr. Assessor. You mentioned that there is access directly through Main Street. Did you get an opportunity to look at the site or inspect it?
I haven't, no. This was just what I looked at on Google Street View here.
Okay, so can you tell me exactly where the curb cut is to allow access from Main Street?
I can't see it in these photos, Mr. Navarro. It could be I misspoke and I was looking at the entrance to the lot just south of it.
Okay. I did have a chance to. I noticed on your front page that you have 32 stalls. Did you count the stalls? Oh, I can answer that for myself. You said that you weren't there, so we'll leave it at that. Other than that, this is just a model generated value, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I don't have any questions beyond that.
All right. Mr. Colatriglio, questions?
No, I don't have questions at this point. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Seelan.
With your comparables to old land sales,
Yes, sir. They're vacant land sales.
thank you, that's all. Any questions, Mr. Chair?
Okay, and I guess I'll repeat the same question I had. Do you know how much of this property, if any, is within the 30-meter setback from the High Line?
I haven't done that measurement, Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, but I'll make sure to look that up for my next hearing.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Navarro, you can begin.
Okay. So this is 225 Main Street, also known as 219 Main Street. And you can see on page 2 that it is 12,565, 35 stalls. We're seeking a value of 621,000. I'll get into that value a little bit later in the report. If you turn to page 6, you can see the general picture of it. And what I can say about this property is that there is no access through Main Street. You would either have to access it through the same back lane as the other parking lot that you just dealt with Mr. Newman. Or I'm actually not even sure whether you can actually access it through the adjacent parking lot at the restaurant. There may be a little bit of a bridge there that doesn't allow access into there. So in terms of the count, sorry? Oh, there's an echo. Yes. Oh, I thought somebody was talking to me.
There seems to be an echo, yeah.
Okay. In terms of the highest and best use, I'll get into this in the study that I've submitted. So we have looked at the current highest and best use, and we've determined that to be parking. So I will leave it at that for now. Now, on page 11, we're starting on the approach of evaluation of this property, but in order to give you some context on that and why I deviated from that, we'll turn to page 14 first. So this is the income and expenses that were supplied by the owner. And you can see that it properly details the rental income for this lot, $59,000, expenses, and a net operating income of $27,495. Now, that should actually clue you into something right there, because you can see in the expenses that you're not seeing typical expenses for a parking lot there. And what that means is that this parking lot is leased. And when you have a lease situation, what happens is that the parking operator, in Park Platinum, whoever it is, buys the income stream from this property. Now, the income stream is simply a projection of what they think this parking lot will earn on an annual basis. There's no guarantees that it'll earn that amount. And in some cases, over the past few years, the parking operators have actually been losing money because they overestimated the earning potential of these lots based on some of the things that Mr. Newman had spoken about relating to COVID and a lessening demand for parking because of the office situation in the downtown. So the next page over on page 15 is the evidence and how we can actually say that this is a leased lot. And you can see the points of the lease there. And you can see that it was leased to Imperial Parking and the monthly rent that they pay. Now, that is the rent they pay. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's what the parking lot can generate. It may generate less, it may generate more. We don't know. They're buying the income stream. So some of that information actually is retained by them, and the owner doesn't even know how much it actually generates. But, you know, having had conversations with some of the parking operators, they've been in some loss situations in a lot of scenarios because of the falling demand for parking. Now, when we go back to page 11, basically what we're doing is that we're trying to impute a net operating income for the site based on what we know of parking performance in this area. And that's actually no different than the model would do if it was flipped to income producing as opposed to a land comparison approach. So from the chart above at the very top of page 11, you can see some reported downtown rates. These are actually taken from the actual information, the submissions that the owners make to the city of Winnipeg. So the city of Winnipeg would actually have this information at hand as well. So we've got a sample there with an average of 88.13, a median of 80.31, and we're also basically making adjustments for better locations, average locations, and poor locations. So the best locations, in our opinion, would generate monthly incomes per stall on a net basis between $90 and $130. The average location between 80 and 90, and poor locations between 60 and 80. Now you can see the next chart below that is actually the net income ranges that the model itself produces. So this is actually taken from the city of Winnipeg's own guidelines to income producing properties. So they have a chart relating to income and how properties are performing in the different areas of the downtown. Now, the inner downtown areas, the green areas, I believe this is one of those areas which note NCA 161, 64, 68, 70, and 71. That has a range between $56 on the low end to $104 on the high end. So basically what the city's model would have said is that at the top end, we're looking at about $104 for the very best locations, and for the not so best locations, and then in these NCAs. Now NCAs are basically fragment different areas in the downtown. So the worst ones are at 56. The best ones are at around 104. We've also done something similar to that, where we've actually said the better locations are between 90 and 130, slightly better than what the city is doing. This is an average location for us. It's not a better location. So we've put in a rate around between $80 and $90 net per stall. And you can see there on page 12, next page over, that we've estimated 35 stalls at $85 per month net. And over 12 months, that generates a net operating income of $35,700. Now that is actually higher than what the owner is reporting, because we're doing it on a net basis, taking into account the different performing areas in the city and coming up with a rate that we think is appropriate for this facility, this parking lot. Now, in terms of the net operating income, again, we're at $37,000 or $35,700. Cap rate we've applied to it is 5.75. We've said that the best locations are at 5.5. Certainly, we wouldn't support anything below 5.5. So I'll leave that decision to you. We've advocated for a 5.75 because, again, this is not one of the better locations. It's still a far walk from the major parts of the downtown. And also, it doesn't have electrical feature. It doesn't have electrical connections. So in the winter, you're going to see less use simply because you can't plug in. It's not paved. So it has some drawbacks. And also on the topic of its development potential, well, I'll get into that when I start talking about my downtown parking study. But its potential is limited. Certainly, I think multi-residential would be a problem simply because of its location near the High Line. I didn't make an exact measurement, but yes, there would be a portion of this site that would be impacted by the High Line. And the High Line the way that the bylaw works is that it's not from the top of the High Line. It's not from the bottom of the High Line. It's from the edge of the property line. So it's a little bit outside of the slope of the High Line. There's just a little bit of space there. That's where the parcel ends. And that's where they start counting the actual High Line the distance from the High Line. So it would impact a portion of this site. Limiting its potential to be developed into multi-residential. Now, other uses, I don't know, possibly. I know that there have been several attempts to develop this area in the past and all have failed. So I would say that parking is its highest and best use. It's been parking for quite a few decades at this point. So we believe that that's what the continued use of this will be for the foreseeable future. And also noting a little odd thing about the entire process that we look at, but one of the reasons that we have these 2-year cycles as opposed to 4-year cycles, 8-year cycles, or 10-year cycles is that we're noting the changes in the marketplace on a 2-year basis. And that is simply stated because there are changes in the marketplace. Otherwise, we wouldn't need to have 2-year cycles. So that's where I'm going to leave the valuation portion of it. And if you will allow me, Mr. Chair, I will get into the downtown parking study now. And
Okay, let me
also
just
to note, this will, if we can transfer this information to the next property. That way it will avoid this dragging on too long.
Yeah.
So if the chair will allow, we'll pass this information on to the next one as well. Okay.
Sure.
So if you turn to the parking study, let's start at the beginning. Okay. So we have a parking area in the downtown. You can see it on page 2. The green are parking lots. The kind of pinkish areas are zoning areas, but there's also some red areas in between there that you may not be able to distinguish from the pink area. Those red areas are actually parkades as opposed to parking lots, which are defined in a kind of a green color. And you can see on page 1 that there are roughly 3,757 metered on-street parking spots. And these represent about 8% of the parking supply. Now, there are currently about 35,526 off-street parking spaces. This has been updated. It fluctuates. It's a little bit less now, but it's very much still over 30,000 parking spots in the downtown off-street. An estimated 20% of downtown real estate is devoted to surface parking, comprised of over 150 parking lots. And the municipal, provincial, and federal governments own about 20% of the surface parking lots in the downtown. I'll leave it at that and flip over to the next page, which is page 3. Now, these are the different areas that we look at: the West Exchange, East Exchange, the South Downtown, and the North Downtown. In terms of parking rates, you can see that there are different terms in terms of parking rates, and you can see that from page 5 to page 8, the different areas and the parking rates that are achieved in those areas. Now, those are the posted rates. Let's be clear that that's not what they typically will get on a net basis. That is just what they advertise. Now, in turn, excuse me, on page 9, you can see how parking operations work. And this is where I want to spend a little bit of time just to distinguish between the different types of agreements that there are. Now, the typical agreements are the contract agreements. So basically, under contract agreement or a management agreement, as sometimes people call it, the parking operator manages the parking asset for the owner. And they report all of the income and expenses to the owner, and the owner pays them on a fee basis. So usually it'll be somewhat similar to what you would see in some of the other sectors, 5%, sometimes as high as 10% in parking, but 5% would be a legitimate parking fee. And that would be 5% of the gross revenues. The other type of agreement is the lease agreement. And I spoke about this earlier. The lease agreement is typically where the parking operator buys the income stream from the parking operator or the parking owner. Now, the parking operator is not disclosing what that parking lot will generate. They're estimating what they think it will generate. And then they pay an appropriate monthly rent to the owner. And this particular parking lot is one of these situations where they are actually buying the income stream, a lease. Now, there are several other types of parking arrangements, not typical for Winnipeg, but if you'd like to look at them, you can look at them there. Now, in terms of operations, typical expenses for, and this would include also parking structures. What you will see in there are wages, salaries, more so for parking structures than parking lots, professional fees, insurance, supplies and uniforms, licenses and permits, utilities, management and administration fees, repair and maintenance, cleaning and snow removal, and realty taxes. Now, those will obviously differ between the different types of property. Surface parking lot, usually repair and maintenance is not as high as it is for a parkade. Parkades, different type of beast, they incur a lot more in terms of repair and maintenance because their repair and maintenance tends to be on an annual basis as opposed to a 5-year cycle, say for a surface parking lot where you're looking at repairs and things like over a longer period. For parkades, it's really on an annual basis. In terms of expense ratios, at the very top, you'll see surface and parkade. Actually, that's just surface. These are just surface parking lots, and you can see by the code there, CMPSP. So you can scratch out the part that says and parkades. Show typical expense ratio for a parking lot in the downtown. It's about 49.36%. On a median basis, on an average basis, it's about 52.11. Over the years, and I've been doing parking, Mr. Harden will probably attest to this, that I have been doing parking for quite a few years now. So the parking expense ratios have fluctuated. Generally, they've gone between about 45 to about 50%. That's probably where they've been over the past few cycles. Sometimes they go below that. Sometimes as low as 35%, but those are the odd cases. Typically between 45 and 50% is about normal. And again, these ones here are forming no different. They're at about 52.11% as an average, a little bit higher than they have been in the past, but that's because parking revenues have been falling generally over the past few years. Now, here are some reported rates in the Exchange District at the bottom of page 11, downtown, and then also you have some parkades there on page 12. The next page over talks about capitalization rates, and this is an important section to include with any parking study because of the relationship between office capitalization rates and parking. So Mr. Newman eloquently spoke about this relationship, and it is a very clear relationship. With the decline of office tenancies in the downtown, that parking demand has fallen considerably. And so we're seeing some of the basis point increases on the downtown office sector. In our opinion, parking would have suffered very similarly. So you can see there that Office A, again, we're looking at it from the perspective of the last cycle versus this cycle. We're seeing between a 50 and 150 basis point change. For Office B, it's between 25 and 125 basis points. And then Office Suburban, I don't need to get into. We're not in the suburban areas here. The next page over is the parking chart, okay? So this was a review of parking lot transactions and other types of transactions in the downtown. I believe most of these are parking lots, but there are some exceptions here, so I will note some of the exceptions. 126 King Street at the top, that was a property that was actually declared surplus by the city of Winnipeg. We know that in 2018, it's actually declared that property had a gross income of, I believe, 43,000, and that's in 2018. That is a couple of years before it's sold. So we know that in 2020, we estimated about 45,000, a slight increase from 43,000 from 2019. And in terms of the expense ratio that we used a 40% expense ratio. This is imputed, but the decisions that we're making are logical decisions that if an appraiser was looking at them, they would make similar types of judgment calls. 6.73% cap rate. It sold simply for 401,000. Now, today, it's still a parking lot. We followed up on that. So even with the city trying to encourage development in the downtown, that hasn't happened. It's still a parking lot. So that is a cap rate that we generated from that. The next one over is Pioneer. Again, we used 2017 and 2019 income and expenses and projected revenues between 2017 and 2019, and we came up with a 5.08% cap rate. If you're curious, the workups are actually in the appendix, so you can actually go through them. Now, the next one over is 175 Donald Street. Now, this one, I believe, is actually in the assessor's evidence on one of the properties that we have today. So I will speak about this one right now. This was actually part of a land assembly for high density development. So it didn't sell as a parking lot, and it wasn't a parking lot. It was actually a small little parkette in between two parking lots and an office building. And people used it to have lunch. There was a nice little bench there, and I believe a picnic table, and that's what it was being used for. It was not a parking lot. You can see that actually on page 45 of the brief. So if you turn to page 45, okay. Is everyone there? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can see the explanation there, 175 Donald Street. The vacant lot, it's the one with the yellow star in it. Clearly not a parking lot. But it became part of the development there on the corner of, I believe that is St. Mary and Donald Street on the east side. Now, of note, that project actually grinded to a halt, and that's because it went bankrupt. It's the state of development in Winnipeg. So I believe it's been bought recently, so hopefully that will commence and they'll start to finish what they started. But, I stress that that type of sale should be viewed with caution. Now, the next one is 330 Donald Street that I'll highlight. That is, it sold for 2.4 million, and that is in August of 21. We've estimated cap rate of 5.38, so we use 2018 and 2020 INEs. And again, we estimated revenues for 2021. That is actually one of Mr. Newman's properties, so we had some conversations with him about that. So we are comfortable with the position of 5.38 on that. The next one down is another one that's in the assessor's evidence today. That is 170 Bannatyne Avenue. Now that one we've calculated a 4.65% cap rate. We used 2016 and 2018 INEs, and we projected for 2019. That workup is actually on page 51, and that is actually a stabilized one. So we're taking several years and stabilizing it. Much like you would do for an apartment building or even a hotel property, you would take the income and expenses and and net them out. So the next one over is 127 Bannatyne. This is kind of a sister property to this one. They were bought kind of, I'll explain that, but we've generated a cap rate of 6.23, same type of thing. We took several years of INEs and projected for 2019, came out with a cap rate of 6.23. Now, these two properties at 170 and 127 Bannatyne are of particular interest because of something that Mr. Newman also noted in his presentations. This was part of a greater development of 433 Main Street, which is the passport office people know as. Now, that building was converted from its office use in the past to a multi-residential use. So the upper floors are now multi-residential development. And as the owner was preparing all of this, he was trying to consolidate parking for his new residential tenants. So he went out looking. We know that a premium was paid on these parking stalls or these parking lots. So even though we've calculated cap rates that we think are good, still point out that there was a premium paid on these. Another one that I want to highlight is 124 Bannatyne. This one sold in October of 2019, 3.64 million. It's quite large, 30,000 square feet. This is one of the premier parking lots in the downtown, in our opinion. And we do have an income for 2017. And we also noted that the assessment's view of this was actually skewed a little bit because they have less parking stalls than was actually transacted. So there were some parking stalls that were included in a small adjacent lot that this property actually leases from the city of Winnipeg. So that actually takes the parking stall count to about 124. Now, that means that we're generating more income from it because we're also including that one. That was all part and parcel of the same economic unit. It transferred with the sale, that lease transferred with the sale. So we included those additional parking stalls in there. And came up with a cap rate of 6.04. So that is actually, again, one of the premier parking lots in the downtown and selling for about 6% cap rate. Why? Well, that's what's happening with the parking incomes. And this is all before the pandemic. So our view of parking since the pandemic has changed how we view parking in general. We're just seeing a lot less demand in terms of parking. Those revenues that were there prior to the pandemic are not there anymore. So there's more risk to them in general. Added to that is the added issue of development in the downtown. Now, there's an old saying that you can't build anything in the downtown without government intervention. Okay, so nothing gets built in Winnipeg without having some level of government contributing to the development of some property. I mean, that goes for every type of thing, whether it's an arena or a large scale development. And we'll get into that because I've included some of that as well. Now, the next one that I've highlighted in yellow is, you don't have it in yellow, but it's just called Donald Street. That one sold the 27th of September, 2022, 1.5 million. We've generated a cap rate of 5.49. Again, we've gone through the exercise of imputing a cap rate. That is on pages 78 and 79. You can take a look at that. Now, we took a look at several of these properties, and in terms of the cap rate that we came up with as general, we think it starts at about 5.50. And as you get further and further outside of the downtown in less desirable locations, it would increase. So 5.5 for the better locations in the downtown is what we advocate for. And we've gone through a pretty exhaustive exercise of trying to look at how properties are transacting. Now, the next page over on page 15 is the issue of highest and best use. And I believe Mr. Newman.
Okay, Mr. Navarro, I'm getting different page numbers than you. For me, this is on page 21. highest and best use argument.
Oh, it's not on page 15? No?
No.
No, it's labeled as
We're
21.
trying to follow along, I guess.
There must be something different in the numbering then. Oh,
Sure.
I get it. You know what? I probably have a more, either you have a more updated version or I have a more updated version. So they're still the same content. So let's go to the section where you see the highest and best use.
Yeah, it's page.
I don't think we actually need to get into detail on this because we did discuss it. You guys discussed it with Mr. Newman. It's the same information. We've gone through the exercise of trying to determine the highest and best use for these properties that we're looking at today, and parking is it. It's not anything else. In terms of the timelines for development, highest and best use suggests probability. What is the probability of any type of future development? And that word itself creates a timeline. So whether there is a timeline to development, we like to see some type of evidence in the marketplace that something is being targeted for development in order to make that switch to a higher and better use. With these properties that we're looking at today, there's none of that. We've scanned the marketplace. We've talked to the owners. Is it on the market? No, this is a parking property. Whether it's possible, sure. Under the zoning, there's a lot of things that you could build on these sites, but the more important thing is not whether it's possible, it's actually whether it's probable. That's the more important question. And in terms of whether there is any probability to converting these in the immediate future, and we're talking about up to 5 years, no, not likely. Not until there's some major correction in the marketplace in the downtown for the office sector. This is going to stay parking. There's just not enough demand for any type of development. Mr. Newman also spoke about this, that the trend right now is conversion. And the reason for that is because of the lower cost. So because building costs, building materials have gone up so much since the beginning of the pandemic, it's prohibiting some of the development that would have occurred in the downtown. And developers are actually taking a different route now. They're starting to look at the better route, which is taking older office buildings and starting to convert them into multi-residential. So that is what we're seeing in the marketplace. Now, I'm going to say that the next section, I don't know what page you're at, but there's a section there that says highest and best use argument.
Yeah, starting on page 21. Yeah.
Okay, so here's an important section. So right there on the point number 2, that the use must be probable rather than unlikely or highly speculative. So that's the point that we want to stress, is that yes, you can suggest a land value. However, without properly looking at the highest and best use, that's really speculating. However, another point that we have to make is that when you use the land comparison approach, and I use it all the time, I value land in Winnipeg for our office. I value land for our office in the rural areas. So one thing that you need to be conscious of in land valuation is that there have to be a set of adjustments to it that come with every type of analysis for land sales. And the most important ones are obviously locational ones, but they also relate to land use, land size. So if you have something that is, for example, 3,000 square feet, and you have a property that's 10,000 square feet, are they really apples to apples? That's what you have to ask yourself. No, probably not. Amongst other things in those tests that you have to conduct when you do a proper land comparison or direct comparison approach. So generally, when I'm doing a comparison of land in a rural area, for example, I'm seeing very similar types of lands right next to each other and hopefully within proximity and very similar in terms of every aspect. So I'm trying to keep the adjustments that we have to do to a minimum. For this type of property, you would have to make some adjustments to it. And you would also have to interview the owners to know exactly what went into the transactions. For example, both of us, like Mr. Newman and myself, can point out that 170 and 127 Bannatyne were part of an assemblage. Not a typical assemblage like you would see in terms of, assembling, 3 or 4 parcels together to build one building. But this is, again, this is the trend in Winnipeg. We're seeing a different type of development going forward, conversion. However, in some cases, they have to assemble other features to make that development viable. So for that type of property, you needed additional parking to service the multi-residential clients that were there. So below that, it says the most common error concerning reviewing the subject's highest and best use is whether potential use is probable rather than possible. Probability suggests timeline, which is why we need to convey whether the timeline to a change in use is likely to occur in a short period of time. We can say without doubt that these ones are not going to convert into any type of use in the near future. Parking is their highest and best use right now. Now, on the issue of assemblage, you should see some pages beyond that. We'll get into 310 Donald Street. It's on my page 17. I don't know what page it's on for you guys. 23. Okay, so 310 Donald Street, a very large development. Some of you may know it. It's a glass house lofts. It's also the Alt Hotel. Now, that involved one little property and then another set of properties that were assembled together. Now, when you get these assemblies together, they often take lots, smaller lots that really didn't have much of a highest and best use. You probably could have built another very similar, I believe there was a record store here at one point, and it maybe could have continued on to be something like that. Some parcels do not reach their highest and best use unless they're assembled. And that's enough.
Mr. Navarro, could we take just a short 5-minute break here till 11:25?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back at 11:25.
Oh, we are going to do about 60 minutes. 60.
Mr. Chair, we are now live.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Navarro, you were on land assemblage, so you can go
Yeah,
ahead.
so not too much to go there, Mr. Chair. This will be fairly quick now. So I believe 310 Donald Street with the topic heading at the very top where it says 310 Donald Street was on your page 23.
23.
Yes,
Okay. So the next page over on page 24 on your copy would show the rest of that assemblage, which is the Alt Hotel, the Glass House, and also the office building there. So that took quite a large assemblage. And again, individually, these parcels, they may not have anything beyond their highest and best use. So it essentially takes an assemblage to give them a higher and better use. On your page 26, this was 245 grand. This was supposed to be a parking lot and an adjacent parking lot that was part of an older hotel, the St. Regis Hotel, that were essentially assembled into one. Now, this one actually didn't transpire, and I believe there were some legal issues with the company and stuff like that that happened, and it never got built in the first place. But again, with a large scale, the large scale developments require more land, and you need to assemble them to actually give them a higher and better use. That's the point that we're trying to get across. Same with 185 Donald Street. I think we just covered this one with that sale on 175 Donald Street. Again, it required 2 parking lots and the little parkette that we dealt with at 175 Donald Street. Bring them together, higher and better use. Individually, no. Their parking value is pretty much the highest and best use. You really need to assemble them into something else to give them a higher and better use. The last point that I'll make on these ones is that all levels of government make some contribution to these things. So as I said before, nothing gets built in downtown Winnipeg without some type of government assistance, either through municipal, provincial, or federal, TIF, whatever it may be. Again, going and looking at downtown right now, it's not in the best condition. So we think that the current use for these parking lots is still parking. Regarding all of these matters that I've just discussed regarding 225 Main Street and the parking study, I'm open for questions now.
okay, questions, Mr. Kupfer?
Just a few. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Beginning on page 19 of your Altus downtown parking study. This should be the page with the table of comparables for land sales and cap rates. So I'm seeing a lot of familiar properties here, either through this property or other ones I've discussed today. I think the majority of these, with the exception of the bottom ones on Maryland and Sherbrooke, I've also used as downtown comparables.
Yeah.
So the meat of this, and feel free to disagree if you feel that way, is between about $80 and $130, excluding the high maximums and low minimums. Would you agree with that?
I think if you're looking at them from a direct land comparison approach and ignoring all the other facts, then yes.
Okay. Looking at your page 20, you provide the four tests, so to speak, for highest and best use. Would you agree that this property is physically possible for development? Or are there any impediments under physically possible?
As far as I know, there is only the issue of the high line.
Have you done a measurement from the edge of the property to the high line?
I actually did do a Google Earth measurement, but I didn't include it, but it does impair the back half of the lot.
Okay. Would you agree with me that a land valuation would be the one which produces the highest property value, as your 0.4 dictates?
Again, that is ignoring other facts But yes, if you wanted to come up with a value that was higher, you could simply look at the land value, ignore any adjustments that you have to make to those land sales, and likely come up with a higher value for it. But again, in our opinion, that would be ignoring a lot of other facts.
Okay, thank you. I just had one more question, and this one's back on the brief, which was submitted for the actual subject property.
Okay.
On page 9, there's an excerpt, looks like included from the municipal board, a decision from 2002. And this states in quotations that the board has consistently applied the income approach in valuing office, industrial, and warehouse space. Would you agree with me that this is not an office, industrial, or warehouse space?
Where is that again?
Page 9 of your brief.
Okay, I'm sorry for being kind of, can we go to exactly the points that you're looking at in the paragraphs there?
So page 9, under the cost approach to value,
Yep.
at the bottom of the page, there's an excerpt from a municipal board decision. It's dated January 24th, 2002.
Yeah.
And this order states that the board has consistently applied the income approach in valuing office, industrial, and warehouse space. Correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
So would you agree with me that this surface parking lot is not an office, industrial, or warehouse space?
Based on what's written there relating to the cost approach, and that is an insert that we include on most of our briefs. But yes, it's not referring to parking. However, I will note that I have taken several parking properties to the municipal board, and they were valued on income, not other approaches.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Seelan, any questions?
Yes, so actually 35 stalls, is it 32 as the city has it?
35.
35?
Yeah, we're not going to understate it. It's 35. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. That's all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Colatriglio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm gonna ask the same question I asked Mr. Newman earlier. With respect to the land value being the lowest, common denominator. If you have an income approach that generates a value, if it doesn't support the land, in other words, if it's lower than the land value.
Right.
How can you use the income to arrive at that? And I'd like to hear your thoughts on, do you feel that the income or the land value is a bottom that you can't go past, save for dips in the marketplace? And I appreciate that there will be ups and downs within the marketplace.
So regarding empty lots in the downtown, there are situations where I do use land values. And that is in those cases of empty lots, or where those lots are not being used as parking for income, for parking generation. So I believe there was an example of one that was beside the Mitzi's restaurant, or the former Mitzi's restaurant, which looks like a parking lot, but it's not. There is some parking that goes along there, but that's basically it's for what we would call personal use for another property that's close by. So that owner bought it and they use it for their own employees or whatever. They're not charging them market rents or anything like that. So we wouldn't look at that situation and say that that is an income producing property specifically for parking. And we would try and generate something based on land sales or something like that. However, in most cases where we're looking at parking in the downtown, we've identified that most of them are income generating properties, and that's what they're bought as. We interview the owners, they tell us that. And we can see their annual returns. So why don't we use an a land approach? So for the very specific reason that I started talking about this, and you heard me talking about this just a few minutes ago, that there are a set of adjustments that need to be made when you're using the land comparison approach to make things equal, okay? So you have relative comparisons, apples to apples, okay? And those comparisons, those adjustments are clear. They're clear defined in the literature for the assessors and the appraisal literature. So one of the complicated things with that is finding apples to apples comparisons. There are very few perfect comparisons where you don't have to make adjustments. Look at the assessor's comparables on page 5 of their okay. So right off the top, 18,173, 6,577. The next two are relatively close in size and relatively close in location, and they share the same zoning. But look at the other three: M zoning, C2 zoning, C zoning, D zoning, meaning that they have different zoning. There are different requirements for each. How are you adjusting for that?
Also note that none of those have Main Street addresses now.
Exactly.
And are not affected by the.
Bingo.
Not affected by the highlight, but ultimately, land value, you would think, would be the bottom value that you could get to on a parking lot. I appreciate the fact that these are not exact to the subject.
Sure.
And so
Here's my take on it. If I were to use land values to value parking, I would have to make all of those adjustments to bring things in line to the comparisons. And all of those multiple sets of adjustments that I would need to make would make the exercise so long that it's almost not worth doing. And here's the thing. We know from the way that these properties transact, from speaking to the banks, from speaking to the insurers, from speaking to the owners, that's how they're transacting, is their income. They're not looking at land values and saying, well, that one there sold for 150 and that one there sold for 170. So we're going to take the median and that's going to be the value. No, that's not what they're doing. They're looking at the projection of income for the property. They're trying to stabilize and see what it will generate over a certain amount of time. And then they're applying a capitalization rate that's based on the risk in the marketplace and what they feel the security of the income is over a certain amount of time. So when you say, could you do it? Yes, it's an exercise that you could do.
Okay.
However, there are so many variables to it that the income is much more reliable.
So let me circle back, because you had said, we talked about one other property that had no parking on it whatsoever, not the one at Mincy's, but the other one that was used as a picnic facility, I believe is what was, so, and I appreciate there's no income being generated there. But it is a lot that exists. The owner is obviously motivated to maintain that for his own reasons, probably an eye to the future development at some point.
Yeah.
Nobody knows when that may be.
Well, actually, we do know something about that, Sarah.
Okay.
So here's how it went. They had the two parcels in the beginning, and they had the third parcel, which was a little parkette at the end. So they approached the owner and they said, what's it going to take to buy this thing? $200 a square foot, $250 a square foot. Here it is. And that is essentially what they decided on in terms of the price. No looking at sales and that type of thing. They were assembling those parcels. They needed that one. So what they were going to pay for is what they paid for. And
What the market for?
Yeah, and they didn't really question it. And if they had to pay $250 a square foot, they would have paid $250 a square foot.
And that would have set the market for that. Space.
No, because again, you have to,
I appreciate that there's different motivation, people motivated differently.
yeah,
And let me say
Yeah.
that clearly, motivated differently for each parcel.
for
And
sure.
I appreciate that, I really do, because it's not always cut and dry. If
Yeah,
it was cut and dry, this job would be a lot easier. It's not.
I think the distinction with that one is that it was the third part of and the last part of that assemblage. And for the last part, you're gonna pay the most.
Yeah. Once everyone else is keyed to the fact that this is happening,
Yeah, and everybody knew what was happening.
Yeah.
So,
and I can appreciate that also,
Mhm.
but ultimately, the question that I always circle back to is. Does the land value not set the bottom? And do you feel that the value that you're asking for today at $621,000? Do you feel that that is substantiated when you look at the land sales that you've seen in the other parking lots in downtown Winnipeg? Even the ones you've presented, the ones that the assessor presented? In your opinion, do you think that we should be looking at something completely?
there should be,
We're talking at this point, if you look at. Sorry, just for the exercise. 621,000 square value on 12,565. Oops. Apparently I have fat fingers. So you're looking at $49 a square foot for that as a value, whereas we're seeing values in the $80 to $110 range for other parking lots. Now, I appreciate the fact that you're saying, hey, there's factors that you have to adjust, et cetera, but you're asking us to really move quite a ways away from what some of these land, ultimately what they are, land sales. And yeah, in the past, income approach, when they were not being affected by COVID and the subsequent issues that have happened, and I appreciate that. Income was greater than the cost of the land. So when it flips around, you're saying, no, we should still go with the income because cuts. And yet you're asking us to move to a number of basically almost half, not quite half, but almost half of what some of the other land sales are in downtown Winnipeg. And I'm just trying to justify that in my mind.
Okay. So several ways of answering that. Second, and you answered some of it yourself by bringing up those things. So in order to make the comparison meaningful, you have to have an apples to apples comparison. So those adjustments are primary, they're not secondary or tertiary. Those adjustments have to be made in order to be to have that apples to apples comparison. That hasn't been done. We don't know how the model does it, but I suspect that it doesn't go into that high detail of making those adjustments. We don't know how the model works. There is some mystique behind it. So unfortunately, we're never going to get that out of the city of Winnipeg.
It's a difficult explanation.
It's a difficult explanation. So here's an example that kind of highlights that. Okay. Donald Street. It's one of the bottom ones. It says September 27th, 2022. Okay, this is not that much further behind from the reference date. Okay, so when you look at it from the perspective of sale price per square foot, 83.10. Okay. Now, is that important? I don't know. If you were going to compare it to something else, you would again have to go through that step by step process of making adjustments so everything is kind of compared to equally. However, when we look at the capitalization rate, and we did have a conversation with this these people. They are our client. They told us about the sale. So we're fairly confident, even though we don't have that income information from the previous owner. We were able to impute something that is exactly where they were in terms of determining the value of the property. 5.49 is the cap rate that we came up with. Now, is there some variability? Sure, it could vary somewhat. Maybe we overestimated the income value a little bit. Maybe we underestimated it. However, we think that it probably would have come out to that range, and that's very consistent with some of the other ones that we looked at. Okay, so when we're looking at parking as the highest and best use, there we have a direct comparison that we can apply equally amongst all of them. Okay, 5.49 is what typically your motivated purchaser is paying in terms of capitalization rate for this type of property. Bang. Okay, there's no other adjustments that we need to make to it. The land sale, again, we have to. I'm sorry if we have to beat this over and over, because
the fact that
if you had a scenario where you had 5 or 6 parking lots that were in a relatively close area of similar size and sold in a similar time frame,
oh, you want perfection now. We don't have perfection.
but those are the adjustments that we have.
Well, okay, can we move on in the questioning?
Well, I think that the question that I've asked has been answered. I appreciate
Yes.
the discussion that goes with it. It's still a very difficult
I
problem.
mean, from my perspective, we've advocated for the income approach, always. We've never deviated from it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Sealing, did I ask you if you had questions yet?
Yes, you have.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, then it's my turn. I'm going to ask about the sale in 2014. It was at a higher value without even considering inflation than what you're asking for now.
Yeah. So what I would say to that is that from the information that we have as of the reference date, at that time, the market was just a little bit better in terms of parking revenues. There was a lot more going on in terms of the city, in terms of development. Office sector was in much better condition. The Jets were back. Things were still good with the Winnipeg Jets. People still felt happy about it. I would say that unfortunately things were just a lot better back then. So that's what I would account for in terms of the sale price. And you know, we have to stress that the parking revenues, and Mr. Newman also highlighted on this, the parking revenues took a high tumble. Right. And for the most part, some of the sales that we're looking at in terms of calculating the capitalization rates, a lot of them are actually happening before the pandemic. So, you know, we've always had this issue, and Mr. Harden, you've been here for parking since I can remember being here as well, is that the city has always been, for the most part, either around 5 or below 5% in terms of the capitalization rate. And the usual response that they gave is because it's open land, it's readily available for development and there's no risk to it. That's their response, and it's always been the same response. We feel differently. This is what we presented on. So I hope that kind of explains why we have a difference in terms of the values over those years. However, as I said, in terms of when I first presented on the value, yes, I mean, maybe I understated parking income. I don't know. Was it on the higher end? I've checked into the performance of this lot going back quite a few years, and it's never been exceptionally the best performing lot. So I ranged it in that middle grouping of the parking rates that I said, average. But in terms of the capitalization rate, I said 5.75. The issue of the high line comes into play. So you note that the sale actually occurred in 2014. The high line and the issue of railways and the bylaw actually came in after that. So that issue didn't even exist at the time. So, you know, when considering the purchase back in 2014, they wouldn't have been looking at the Highland and saying, well, you know, Is that going to prevent me from developing this in the future? Well, no, that wasn't an issue at the time. That became an issue, I believe, in 2016 when the bylaw actually came into play. So things changed over time.
All right. Thank you for that. Mr. Cupford, do you wish a summation on this?
I think I'd like to just give one short one at the end of our last property.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Navarro,
I've
summation?
spoken too much already, so.
All right. We'll move on to our last property then is 266 Main. So Mr. Cupford, you can begin on that one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is file 24-1993. The roll number is 1209-2988000. Street address is 266 Main Street, and the owner is Layad 280 Main Incorporated. This is again a surface parking lot with a land area of just over 6,000 square feet. Has the M multi-use zoning and a 2025 assessment of $755,000, again using land value. Pages 2 and 3 of my brief contain some photos and maps of the subject property. So you can see now we're on the west side of Main Street in between St. Mary and Graham Avenue. The lot is rectangular in shape, no strange configuration or anything to contend with here. Looking at my page 4, you can see 2 sales listed. I believe both of these sales would have included other parcels of property. This wouldn't just be for the subject subject property. So these aren't values that we're relying on for our valuation. Underneath that, it shows the land value breakdown. So again, just over 6,000 square feet at a rate of just under $125 a foot is how we arrive at $755,000. Our 2025 assessment. And I'll note that the class code for this property is 40 rather than 60. That's because of the usage. I believe it's used currently by the CDI college nearby. So that's why they get the institutional classification. Page 5 of my brief shows similar land sale comparables that you've been reviewing all day. No changes or updates on those. And then beginning on page 8, I've included the income and expense information as submitted by the property owner. And if you scroll down through the majority of the blank pages here, eventually you'll get to my pages 24, 25, and 26, which show some information about the income and expenses. I believe these were submitted as a joint income and expenses for CDI College, so it's difficult to ascertain any sort of useful net operating income for just the subject property alone. But again, we valued it on land, so that's not an issue. And then beginning on page 27 is the start of my land sale comparable photos and maps. Again, just for your reference when reviewing the comparable sales. So again, 2025 assessed value, $755,000 using land, which equates to just under $125 a foot. And I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Navarro.
I guess the only 2 questions that I have, or one question that I have is, I think we can pass on just everything that we did in the previous one to this one as well. However, in terms of your land comparable selections, you would agree that two of the sites, 641 William and 633 McDermott, aren't even in the downtown, correct?
They aren't particularly close in proximity to the subject, correct?
Okay. They would be closer to the Health Sciences Center. Would you agree?
Yes, I'd agree.
Okay. That's the only comment I have to make.
Okay, Mr. Colatriglio, questions?
No questions at this time, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Seelan.
What factored into push the price per square foot for this property?
I would guess that it's just simply a combination of the location and the size that's resulted in this valuation. Again, I would note that the property has a good configuration. It's just a rectangle right off of Main Street. So there isn't really anything to knock the value down, I would put it. So that's why it's come out at $125, which is admittedly near the top end of our range from what I've seen for parking lots.
Thank you. That's all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, question I have, it seems to be tied to the, I think it's the property next door, if I recall correct. I think I've heard this property before. Would they not be considered one economic unit, then?
I haven't studied the ins and the outs of the lease here with CDI College. We don't have it on file in that way. So again, it's simply being valued open market, willing buyer, willing seller by our model.
Okay, but if it is tied to the college, then that would very much restrict its ability to be sold separately, would it not?
It could, Mr. Chairman, but again, that's simply not how we value our properties for assessment purposes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Navarro. You can begin your presentation then.
Okay, so this is 266 Main Street. The value that we're seeking is $635. 28 stalls. You can see that it is actually used as parking. They do charge a rent to whoever uses those parking stalls. In terms of its general location, it's not too far from the previous example that we saw. It's pretty much across the street. A little bit further north though. And how we valued it is the same way. We took an income approach. Hard to isolate the parking income and revenue or income and expenses from the I&Es, so I didn't even bother with that. I just used a straight market approach. So similar to the other property, in this section, we used 104 times 28 times 12, 34,944. That gives us a value of $635,000. So in terms of its relation to the other property, if you were going to make adjustments to the other property, you might want to look at this one because this one we used a higher rent, a lower cap rate, and they would probably be somewhat consistent in terms of their application. So that's how we would probably view it, but we would still value it on income because land is essentially irrelevant to it. And yes, you spoke to an important fact about it, is that if you have the building and the parking itself is part of that economic unit, then selling it would essentially remove that asset that it has to, successfully run that office building or that building. And so I'm not sure that many would take that step. So at the same time, there are some other ways that we do this. Sometimes we take the income value from the office building, we remove that because it is one economic unit. But in this sense, we valued it as a straight parking lot, no different than the other one. So I'm open for questions.
Okay, questions, Mr. Kupfer.
I was just hoping you could confirm, Mr. Navarro, that based on the zoning, based on the applicable downtown zoning bylaws, there's no requirement to provide parking for this property or for the adjacent CDI College property.
So that is generally a consistent policy throughout the downtown. And that distinguishes the downtown from the rest of the city of Winnipeg. So the suburban areas that are covered by a different zoning bylaw. The downtown has its own zoning bylaw that's specific to the downtown. Mr. Cufford is correct when he says that there is no requirement for parking in the downtown. It's an added feature. However, that's an economic feature that if you have it, it would be hard to unload it because it certainly provides competitive advantage in the marketplace if you have parking. So
That's my only question on this property. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Colatriglio then.
Just one quick question. Plugs?
I believe on one side.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Seelan.
No questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much then. We've now heard all the properties on today's agenda. Thank you.
Governor wants to make a final statement, does he not?
Oh, that's right. They did request final summation. So, Mr. Cup for final summation, I guess.
Just a short one. I just wanted to point out that, the definition of value was provided, in the first brief that we reviewed today, and it's part of our legislation. And that includes a willing buyer, a willing seller, and an open market. And in my opinion, there is no willing seller who is prepared to sell their property at a value which is not considered the highest and best use, and that which is maximally productive. I believe our model has done a good job of that, and that they've applied these assessments in a consistent and equitable way. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Navarro.
I believe we've gone through the exercise of highest and best use analysis, and we presented our facts as such. And the assessor noted in all of the examples that we've seen today that was not done. So we are content in presenting our traditional approach to parking valuation, which is the income approach, and which is the standard by which most transactions are made in the city of Winnipeg.
All right, thank you. Now we've heard all the items on the agenda today, so this hearing is now adjourned. So thank you very much for your capable presentations.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good day, everyone. Hopefully that was